Welcome to the Nirvah podcast. And on the fourth episode, we have Chhavi Jatwani.
So, Chhavi, you grew up in Faridabad and you studied accounting, business studies, economics, math, and English. And after doing that, how did you manage to convince your brown parents to let you study art and design?
It's a funny question to start with. Yes. So it was about, how many years ago was that? About 14, 15 years ago, now. I was lucky because my aunt, my dad's sister, she decided to study art. And as you know, that art is sort of the predecessor of design in India. So a lot of people who were interested in doing something off the beaten path would get into art, and then that sort of opened up another, let's say, field opened up, which was design. So my aunt was into art. I know they're not comparable directly, but I think for me that just helped um, to to do something different. And she used to take me to her college, and she was a sculptor, and she would just give me a piece of clay and like do what you want with it. So I got really like used to building things with my own hands, and that's what helped me identify relatively early that I wanted to pursue product design, because design was still very much about fashion. Design was the first application of design in India. Graphic design was still very, very new. Product design was even more new. Like it was really still hard to understand. But yeah, I understood when I was 16, 17 that I wanted to pursue product design and build things that were useful for people. So I remember I used to have these assignments when I used to go for design coaching so that I could crack a good design school. And they used to give us these assignments, and I would go to my mom and ask her, okay, so what do you need built? And she was like, oh, I need this lipstick case. And I was like, okay, I'll build it for you. So finding these utilitarian things to build gave me a lot of satisfaction.
Right. That's awesome. So you started kind of doing it for your parents, which probably helped a lot, I would assume, which is nice. Yeah. So it is possible. It is possible to convince brown parents to do this. That's amazing.
Yeah.
If you had to pick Indian food or Italian food,
Oh, God. Wow. You're asking me to pick between my two halves. No, I mean, there's no doubt about the fact that I would pick Indian food. I'm still very, very desi at heart. In fact, I just this afternoon I cooked Indian food for my Italian parents-in-law. Um, yeah, definitely Indian food. It's comfort food. But having traveled the world and lived in different places and made many friends across the globe, I would say, a global citizen, and I love many different cuisines. Like I think Sri Lankan food is amazing, which is very similar to Indian food, but also like Mexican cuisine is super good. I love that. So yeah, Indonesian, yeah, these are some of my favorite cuisines.
that's awesome. So you like food, just in general, all
I love
types.
food.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that makes
in
sense.
any form.
And right. So is that how the design transitioned over to food design?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's a funny story because my mom didn't really like me being in the kitchen because India, joint families, it's a very stressful uh, environment, the kitchens. So she used to just be like, stay out of the kitchen. But I used to observe her just without even realizing. I used to observe her a lot. And then when I moved to Bangalore, back then you couldn't find North Indian food in Bangalore. And that's what got me interested in cooking, because I really craved my flavors of my mom and my grandmother and back home. So I started cooking, and then I used to cook these big feasts because our university was 50% North Indian students. So we used to have like 20 people eating at my place. Rajma chawal. I don't know if you have that, which is the red bean curry and rice. And yeah, that's the most comfort food that exists for North Indians. So that's how I got interested into cooking. And but I didn't, until I graduated, I didn't really deeply explore the intersection of food and design. It was only after graduating when I told myself, let me take a pause and think about what I really like, what do I really want to do with my design skills. And that's when I felt that, okay, I have this passion for food. Why don't I try to mix the two? And I discovered that there are actually European designers who are already working at this intersection. That's what fascinated me a lot. And I reached out to some chefs in Delhi, started working with some of the biggest chefs and designing food experiences with them and like narrative storytelling dinners. That got me interested in this space, but it really still wasn't what I was looking for. I did that. I went to Milan and did a master's in food design and explored the food experience space, but it was still very, very niche for me. And the more you get into working with food, you start realizing how complex it is and how it's all about the value chain and the systemic issues that stem uh, from our current food systems. So that's what I then decided to pursue. And since then, I've just been building my skills and trying to impact that.
Right. That's amazing. And what was it like running like these food stalls and home restaurants and feeding like up to 400 people in Italy, right? What was that like? Is that common in Italy to see around you, or was this like a new concept?
Um, so I'll start by answering your first question. What was that like? So I completely, utterly love cooking for people. And I think that at the end of all of this, at the end of, a complex career and everything, I'm just going to have my own little restaurant in some part of the world. And that's what's going to give me the most, satisfaction um, and fulfillment. So it was really amazing to cook for many people and see them enjoy your food. I don't think there exists a better pleasure than that, and a better way to connect with someone else. Like you're literally making with your own hands something that they're going to put inside their bodies. Like it's almost spiritual, and really, really appreciate and I'm grateful that I've had the opportunity to do that. And yeah, when I came to Italy, I thought one of my very serious career trajectories could be to open an Indian restaurant in Italy, and which is why I used to do a lot of the street catering and street food. So it was a very big ethnic food festival where 15,000 people would come in every year. And so that year, I set up an Indian food stall, and we sold 400 plates every day. So it was a pretty big, for me at least, it was a very big achievement, and it was great. It's not that common, which is why I didn't end up pursuing it because Italian food is so great. Locals love Italian food. People come from all over the world to eat Italian food. It's very heavy on food tourism, Italy as a country. So the market size for Indian food is not really that big,
Right.
unfortunately.
Okay. Interesting. So in terms of like your experience with setting up these food stalls and restaurants, what were some of the supply chain like issues that you faced?
Um, Honestly, not a lot because Italy has a big Indian community, big, let's say, relatively big Indian immigrant community, and which means Indians, where even if they go in small amounts, there are always shops that are supplying Indian ingredients, and now spices are being grown all over the world, not just in India. So it was relatively easy to access the spices, and then the vegetables we just used what was available locally because I preferred that to take local vegetables and then add some Indian spices and flavors to it. And the style of cooking was Indian. But the only thing that we had to source was the spices. Of course, we went with the simpler things like lentils or bean curries or chicken curry, and didn't go for something like naan, which is much more complex to make and actually pretty impossible if you don't have the right kind of oven to make it. So we didn't cook those things. But yeah, I would say it wasn't that hard. I don't know if it's a good thing that I was able to access all the spices sitting
That's
here.
no, that's quite cool actually. I guess India, Italy, they have like a very strong food culture, and even though they're yeah, it's interesting to see that you can get your ingredients. I mean, maybe if it was something a bit more niche, like do you think you can get some of the Sri Lankan ingredients over there in Italy as well?
Yeah, there are actually a
Really?
big Sri Lankan community as well, and
Right.
Bangladeshi community, Pakistani community. Yeah.
Okay, that's very cool. And in your experience of like food design, how did you end up using 3D modeling software and 3D impact 3D printing, and how did that
Yeah.
impact your approach?
Yeah. So 3D printing as a technology is being explored for many years now. Within the food space, it's one of those signals that is that's showing us a potential future of personalized nutrition. You know, there are things you can print in your home which are exactly measured to your dietary needs and with the right kind of, nutrient content. So it's definitely a signal that many food innovators have been exploring for, and unfortunately so far the application is only aesthetic, structural aesthetic, sensorial, but not necessarily nutritional. So for us, it was sort of in a luxury product space, which is high quality chocolate. And I was creating this mold for a kind of a chocolate and balsamic vinegar tasting experience. I was creating a mold for chocolate, and so I had learned this 3D software to print chocolates in these cylinders with certain patterns on it. And then I took silicone and made molds out of it, poured chocolate, and so we had these chocolate sort of rollers. And I created this tool so you could almost like roll the chocolate over balsamic vinegar. And it was like a nice sort of sensorial experience where you would say that, maybe 6 months aged balsamic vinegar goes well with a lighter, let's say 60% dark chocolate. But if you go for a more intense aging, like 12-year aged balsamic vinegar, it goes better with 90% dark chocolate. So we created these almost like a experience kit of chocolate and balsamic vinegar. That's how I explored. We also did another really cool project actually, which was printing edible data. So we had created, yeah, it sounds really cool, or I don't know, or not. To me, it sounded very cool.
It does.
Basically, we had done some research about the different cities in the world and how their food cultures are, and we had created these, spider maps, spider
Uh,
diagrams, like radar diagrams, where you have like
right.
something
Okay.
like a spider web and you give points on it. So you have like these weird shapes that come out. So we created in collaboration with a colleague, on top of crackers like biscuits, we were able to print these shapes in specific flavors relating to data from that city. So for example, if we were printing out data of Japan, we had flavors with soy sauce in it. If we were printing data relevant to, it was South America, we had beans flavor in it. So there were those kind of interesting combinations where you're saying that, okay, food culture of Japan says this, and this is what the data says, and visually you can see and read that data, and then you can also eat it. So like those kind of more experiential ways of looking at food design.
Right. That's very cool. Yeah. 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 So as a food designer, when you see, I guess, yeah, food systems, it is as a food systems designer, when you see our current food system from farm to the end consumer, what are some of the things that bother you? What are some of the things that you're like, okay, that needs to change?
Yeah. A lot of them, but actually, with time, let's say I've become. I don't know if it's a good thing if I say that. Less activistic about it, because it's so that was like really my transition and learning journey almost 5 6 years it took me to unlearn a lot of things and learn new things about how complex our food systems are, how they're so intertwined with history and culture and personal preferences and agriculture and literally like what the nature allows us, economics and trade. And so there are so many different factors that are influencing what is on our plate today, right? So nobody can just, it's not very intelligent to just sit there and judge and say that, this is what's wrong with our food system, because we are making this food system every day. We are making these choices every day. So when I think about what I don't like to look at the world in terms of problems. I like to look at the world in terms of opportunities. So what gets me very excited is thinking about a decentralized food system where just like the massive big food companies have, not that they don't exist, but they have changed their ways. Like a bag of Lay's chips, which is or Doritos chips, today it's produced at a rate of 1 million a minute, 1 million bags a minute almost. And they're all the same and they're produced in one location or two locations and they're distributed all over the world. And what does that system look like when suddenly you want to bring in biodiverse ingredients, and it's not just corn based, but it's different kinds of corn based, or it's different corns for different seasons, it's different flavors for different seasons. So how do we create a more agile, more adaptive food system, and less rigid and less centralized food system? So I think the world will be a better place if we have more diversity in our CPG foods.
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting. In terms of like some of the supply chain, and like even when it comes to like these food, the CPG foods that need to be more decentralized, how would, I guess, how can the everyday consumer, the average person like me, for instance, what can I do to push for such a change and give these big companies more of an incentive to take a step in that direction?
It's a good question. I, in general, we really advocate for, climate change is at the end of your fork. Every user has a lot of power to make decisions and you can vote with your wallet. And all of that is true. And I'm going to answer your question in a minute, but I also want to acknowledge that it's also partial truth, because a lot of what we eat is based on lobbies. It's based on political agendas, economic agendas, and and there's efforts from both ways that needs to be made. Like the big sort of people in power policies need to change, and so do the food companies. And yeah, again, not from a point of view of they're a problem, but looking more of it like they need to innovate and they need to change with time. Like today we're still looking at our food system in a way that it was after, in the post-war era, where we are really focused on producing more calories instead of the quality of those calories. Like how much nutrition is it really giving me, and how much nutrition is it depleting from the soils when we're making those ingredients, when we're doing monoculture. So those are those massive systems that really need to adapt with time, and that is going to have a huge impact on what becomes available to us as users as well. On the other hand, to answer the question that you asked me before, I I feel eating more local, more diverse is one way in which you can contribute to bringing that change. So a lot of us are creatures of habit when it comes to food, but encouraging yourself to be curious about different ingredients and local ingredients and promoting those. Like in India, for example, you see a big movement right now with the chefs where they're trying to really push local ingredients finally, because in most developing countries, sort of elite or luxurious food was really, if you're bringing, truffles from Italy or the cheese from France or the, wines from another part of the world. But finally, we are now appreciating our own diversity, and India has an incredible diversity of foods that can grow there. In the same way, I'm sure for Sri Lanka or Pakistan or like this whole of Southeast Asia, in all parts of the world, honestly, if we can really appreciate that. Like, so biodiversity is definitely one of the areas in which we really need to push our food systems. I mean, there are 15,000 varieties of plants, edible plants that exist, and most of our food comes from only 4 crops: wheat, soy, rice, corn. And it's like having a huge buffet table and only eating bread.
Right.
So that, I think, as consumers, we can ask for that, we can look for that, we can be curious about that, we can develop our taste buds. We can build resilience also within our own bodies, like better immunity systems, better nutritional systems. Sorry, that was my mother-in-law for a sec.
It's all
And
good.
and yeah, just eating more diverse foods
Right.
and asking for that.
Okay, right. And in terms of your work, what inspired you to focus more on sustainable and regenerative food systems? And what is the purpose of using more regenerative food systems?
Yeah. So in general, how I landed up here is very linked to how I started this journey, like wanting to create impact, wanting to create meaningful products, generating value, and so which is why my product design, my food design has always been driven by a bigger agenda, like what is the problem that I'm solving or what is the value that I'm adding. It hasn't. I've never played, let's say, in the more luxury or let's say pleasure driven industries, but a lot more about social impact and climate change and those kind of topics. So in general, that's what strongly drives me as a person, and how I've made my career choices. How I landed at the sustainable and regenerative food system, like what was that question again?
Yeah. So what inspired you to focus on that then? And what's the use? Oh, dogs, nice. What's the use of that? What's the utility of it?
Yeah, I'm gonna close this door while they're away.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, there are literally 5 dogs here.
Oh, nice. That's cool. That must be nice. Is that like a big plot of land as well for them to?
Yeah,
Okay, that must be nice for them.
yeah. They grow their own vegetables here, and it's beautiful.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
healthy.
it is. It is. I think that's a part of my dream, my vision for the food systems as well. That not so much from the point of view of, one day everyone's going to grow their own food. No, we're not even going to be at a place where everyone's going to cook their own food. But I really dream that people have that connection with their food, with the earth, with understanding where the food comes from, what a zucchini looks like, how to cut it and how to cook it so that it can be super delicious, and feed it with someone else and share that with someone else, and just enjoy that connection with nature and connection with other people through food. And so no matter how technological or advanced our food systems get, I really hope that people never lose that connection with food. And that is all what sustainable or regenerative is about. today, like if I want to be a little bit more technical, regenerative agriculture talks about a way of doing things that doesn't only deplete the planet, but it regenerates it in the process. Because there is a notion that when we speak about sustainability, we only speak about doing less harm. We speak about tweaking our current system so that we are reducing our impact. While regenerative is about how can we improve the world while doing while cultivating our food and food systems. So specifically talking about agriculture, regen agriculture is where you understand soil and you cultivate soil more than cultivating fruits, vegetables, and ingredients, and you use a set of practices that allow you to regenerate the soil and its nutrition and its quality as you cultivate and harvest. So, for example, crop rotation is one of those, and yeah, where you don't keep cultivating the same crop every year. Every 2 years, you change the crop into like between, let's say, grains and legumes. So if you cultivate legumes, it fixes the nitrogen back into the soil, improving its quality. And yeah, so that's kind of the regenerative agricultural system. And today it's being applied also more philosophically to our lifestyle and just looking at the world around us as to how we can not just consume and take from it, but regenerate it. Regenerate our surroundings, regenerate ourselves, our communities, our ecosystems. Yeah. And
Right.
I'm very aligned with that, which is why I'm a proponent of that.
Right. And in terms of, I guess, your experience as well, you probably have seen this in India. I'm not too sure if this is the same, but in Sri Lanka, when you go out to the farms and when you talk to them, there's a huge gap in like their knowledge in terms of how to grow in a regenerative way and various new techniques to maintain the soil quality, the rotation of crops, and like there's a huge gap in their knowledge and in also the business side of farming. So they're not that good at like the entrepreneurial side. So they're in quite the oppressed state. Whereas when you look at the Western countries, there are a lot of like educational programs, there's a lot of support, and they seem to know a lot more about how to do it in a more sustainable way in the long run, whereas trying to get the best yield for the next few months. And maybe you see this like difference between India and places like Italy as well. But as a food systems designer, how do we fix this in countries like Sri Lanka or in India if that's the case there as well?
Yeah. So first, there's a lot. I really agree with your reflections, right? And but there's a lot in there to unpack. Uh, we're speaking about developed countries versus developing countries, so the contexts are just very different. Climatically, we are speaking about two entirely different, contexts again. And when I look at our countries like India, or I don't know much about Sri Lanka's food system, when I look at India, I realized how political food is. Like a big part of our GDP is agriculture, and India has largely been an agrarian economy. So farmers have been the backbone of our whole country, but it's also extremely political, the way our systems are set up. And of course, you're right that we don't have. I don't know if it's not having access to that knowledge. It's almost like, and this is not only for India, but it's almost like we lost a big chunk of our collective memory when we went ahead with the Green Revolution. Like the Green Revolution was started in India, where we really pushed a lot of fertilizers and like genetically modified seeds, and to try to get a higher yield, right? Like that was the goal. The first goal was to make sure nobody's hungry. and we did a great job at that. But over 50, 60 years of that, doing agriculture in this very industrial way, using a lot of the pesticides and fertilizers and GMO seeds, etc., has kind of depleted our soils. And now we kind of find ourselves lacking of information, but that's ancestral knowledge. Regenerative agriculture is essentially based on ancestral knowledge. And I'm not saying we need to go back to how things used to be done 200 years ago. Actually, most proponents of regen ag talk about how we can bring in, there is going to be a cultural awareness that's going to come in, but also a technological, let's say, disruption that's going to support regenerative agriculture at scale. Because the reason why we landed at Green Revolution was that we couldn't continue to cultivate food in a certain way that was maybe better for our soils, but still it wasn't the most efficient way of doing agriculture. And now we sort of need to blend the best of both worlds. And more than knowledge is going to be an important part, but technology is going to play a huge role in that, in helping farmers in an easy way adopt regen methods.
Right. And in terms of this, how can we take like a practical series of steps to move from like extractive to regenerative and centralized to distributed and taste and convenience driven to more of a health and well-being focused food system?
Yeah, that's my big sort of 30-year career goal that you're reading out there. Um, so I can talk about some examples, like in terms of regen ag, there are some initiatives, some pilot ways of bringing it to the mainstream. Basically, we need to create mechanisms where the farmers can be incentivized to shift from their current farming methods to regen farming methods, right? So in a way, you need to secure them for the next 3 years, and say that, if you farm in this way, your next 3 years are going to be secure and you're going to get that money. So there are transition funds that are being set up to help farmers transition from current farming systems to regen farming systems. That's one way. We're also seeing a lot of ecosystem credits coming out, which are like the farmers that are being guardians of the ecosystem and are doing cultivating in the right way. They receive certain coins and credits. So basically, they receive money for maintaining the best practices of regen ag, which, because essentially what you're doing is you're saving the communities and the surroundings around you with the, let's say, for example, the chemical sprays that otherwise the conventional agriculture would be using. So since you're doing that, we're gonna sort of compensate you through credit. So that is a mechanism that's coming about. As people and community at our own level, I think it's each municipality holds a lot of power. So if you're able to mobilize people within your community and work with your local municipality to then work with the farmers in your community and convince them, and maybe bring in some sponsors who can set up these transition funds. So that's kind of a way in which you can start from a small location, putting together different actors towards this transition. So that would be more around the, instead of extractive, more regenerative. For distributed and decentralized systems, I don't know yet. I think it's a big logistics question, and but it's also a big consumer mindset question, because today consumers are used to having everything everywhere, like having avocado sitting in Iceland, or so there is some level of sensitization that's going to need to happen. Only then people are going to see the value in eating what's local and available. So there's a little bit of a long pathway there. And I think in terms of health and nutrition, health and well-being, there's definitely much more awareness now. Um, Around food products that are not just about feeding people but also about nutrition. A lot more awareness is coming around that. We see a lot many nutritionists and dietitians, and that sector is only set to grow.
Right. And yeah, in terms of like extreme scenarios and extreme situations, I guess the recent pandemic was one of them, where things kind of went from what it was to something completely different very quickly. And how has this affected the way people think about food systems, and what has this ended up doing to our current food systems in either like a positive way or a not so positive and opportunistic way?
Yeah. So a lot of it has gone back to how it was. Like a lot of the things have been restored to the status quo. But if I have to point out one big change, or let's say just like an expansion of a sector, it's the home delivery and ghost kitchen sector. Like people just got used to delivering food so much that that the cooking, like on the one hand, you may have seen with the first wave, people were cooking a lot more food because the restaurants weren't ready to, they couldn't adapt. But when they did adapt, delivery sector just boomed, and there are like ghost kitchens in every nook and corner, and there's so much offer on the food delivery platforms for such affordable prices that people are not incentivized to cook anymore. And again, it's for better or for worse, but this massive shift has happened thanks to the pandemic.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That is true. Even with my friends, so many of them are just like they're still getting takeout all the time, and
Yes.
it's not that healthy, but yeah, I guess they're just used to it now. And can you talk a bit about the Earth Regeneration Toolbox and how it supports holistic and interconnected thinking um, for like, systemic regeneration?
Yes. So the Earth Regeneration Toolbox is essentially these five lenses of looking at our food system, where we usually, when you would ask people to break down the food system, they would break it up in the supply chain. And it's like, there's agriculture, and then there's processing, and you have your logistics and transport and distribution and retail and restaurants and consumption, etc. Earth Regeneration Toolbox gives you a different way of looking at food systems, where it starts from political lenses, from environmental lens, from the social lens, from food identity and cultural lens, from a prosperity driven lens. So these are, if you've seen the graphic, these are the five lenses with which we look at the food system, and we use that to let's say ask ourselves better questions about what is it that we need to solve for. So I'll give you an example. If we're looking at plant-based foods, when we look at the problem of meat consumption in the food system, right, like how meat consumption is growing in developing countries, as they're getting richer, they're consuming more and more meat. It has already been huge in developed countries, and it is the third largest cause of carbon emissions in the world. So, which means like third largest cause of global warming, basically. So we see a big movement of veganism and plant-based eating. So looking at that, I need to study this area from the lens of politics. What kind of policy changes do I need to bring in to make our supermarkets more ready for it, to make our local supply chains more ready for this kind of transition? I have to look at it from a food identity lens as well, right? Like so many cultures have meat very deeply rooted in them. So you can't ask people to suddenly stop eating meat. But how do you help them transition slowly and gradually towards a more, let's say, plant forward diet as opposed to a very strict vegan or vegetarian diet? It's about how do I adapt my recipes, my current way of eating in a way that it's less carbon intensive. So, and when I look at it from a prosperity lens, I also need to think about, okay, how do I create holistic businesses out of it? I can't just cut the farmers out of the picture. I need to make sure that they are a part of this plant-based movement and transition towards more plant-based eating. So how do I make sure they're included in it? So yeah, this is kind of, it's a toolbox to help you look at a problem not from, putting blinders on and just focusing on one area, which often happens. Like if you look at impossible meats or a lot of the soy based products, we were like, oh, we need a plant based solution, so soy is the easiest one, let's make a lot of soy based products. But soy is actually extremely resource intensive. It's not the best solution if you have to do like millions and millions of acres of monocultures of soy. It's actually equally bad for the planet, if not equally, but it's pretty bad for the planet. So that is a sort of single-minded and unidimensional thinking. How do When you suddenly zoom out and look at it from a holistic picture, you say that okay, maybe a part of that demand can be solved by soy, but maybe other part of that demand can be solved by legumes or peas, or like how do we, again, biodiversity comes into the picture there. So looking at it holistically, maybe in one part of the world soy makes more sense, in another part of the world some other kind of plant-based protein makes sense.
Right, right, makes sense. And in terms of aspiring like food systems innovators and entrepreneurs, what would your advice be given the current climate and given what you think the world needs?
I think patience, tolerance, open-mindedness. What we're working with is not as simple as designing a new bag or a new jacket, or or a new car. Even we're really looking at, like, questioning the fundamentals of our existence. We're talking about food. It's like the first product of the world. So you can't make a change if you're not conscious and sensitive about that. So how you make a business out of this in today's climate? How do you make a business within the food space in today's climate? You have to know about all of these things. You have to know about what our planet needs today. We have to know about what our human bodies need. Like, there are record rates of diabetes in India, record rates of cancer, record rates of obesity. Like, health and nutrition wise, what do our bodies need today based on our lifestyles? Because at one time our diets made sense because our ancestors would wake up in the morning, have a huge breakfast, go and farm all day, and they would process, their bodies would process all that food that they're eating. But today we're eating way too many calories from what we are actually burning than what we're actually burning. So based on our new lifestyles, our eating habits and our food cultures need to change. So being conscious of all of these topics and being curious, really, like, it's going to take a lifetime to know everything, but being open-minded and curious, and developing a sensitivity towards the current climate in the food systems is very important, I think, for anyone who wants to work in this space.
Right. Yeah, for sure. That's amazing. And lastly, what would you say are your future plans for the Future Food Network, and how do you plan on continuing to drive innovation and change in the food industry?
Yeah, so actually, I have news. It's not official yet, but I am transitioning into one of our sister organizations, and my big focus is going to be narratives around sustainability to improve and nudge behavior change in the food system. So a lot of my focus is going to shift towards how do we talk about sustainable foods on our menus, within student canteens, on our food products, and how do we create a very exciting narrative about better eating so that it's a party that everyone wants to go to instead of, oh, I have to sacrifice so much for the planet and for my health, etc., etc. But how do we create a system and a story around healthier and more regenerative foods that is very, very exciting and that makes people want to try it and change?
Right. That's awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for doing this.
Of course, it's been a pleasure.